Hello and a very warm welcome. Thanks for tuning in to News 9 Live. The question we're going to be probing in the next couple of minutes is, can India and China ever be friends? Frenemies, that's the tag on the latest documentary that has come out on the News 9 Plus application. But before that, we all know that today India is the most populous country in the world. Many would tend to think this is a hindrance, but for many, this is exactly what India needs to assert its position on the global stage. Our workforce and cognitive capacities have been highlighted thousands of times and have been pioneers in various other sectors as well. But China, our neighbor and one of the biggest, if not the biggest economy, gives us a tough fight, even as the two countries share a love-hate relationship. We have had wars, border scuffles and clashes, yet ironically, our trade with China is at an all-time high. This comes at a time when India is already pushing the idea of Make in India and Atmanirbhar Bharat and banning Chinese apps and intrusion as much as possible. Diplomatic ties, too, also have to be dealt with delicacy. Supermarkets are filled with their goods. But where is this eyeball-to-eyeball conflict leading us? $140 billion worth of economy versus India, that is more than 5 times what India has. Now, what does China want apart from keeping India guessing? It has 5 times the economy. We have more youngsters with us. India buys more. They manufacture more. India is a great hub for any manufacturer. 40 big plants have decided to move out of China. Tesla as well. But even as India has miles to catch up, the question we're trying to probe here is that, can India and China ever be friends? Can we look beyond our border clashes as well? Joining me in the studio is the man behind this particular story, Amit Ranjan from News9. Warm welcome to you. And with us on the broadcast is Lieutenant General Rakesh Sharma, a defense expert who has erstwhile commanded the Fire and Fury Corps in Ladakh as well. A very warm welcome to you, Lieutenant General. Well, I'm going to quickly go first to you, Amit. The name of the documentary, Frenemies. Before we talk a little bit about that, let's quickly take a look at this snippet of the documentary called Frenemies. It's on the News 9 Plus application. Quickly download it from the Google App Store or the Apple App Store for other incisive analysis and cutting-edge documentaries as well. But first, a snippet of this, and then we'll get the discussion rolling.
This is a dichotomy between economy and between warfare. These are separate baskets and they should not be compared.
Why do we allow them to sell us goods that we can make on our own?
Specific segments, particularly on the business side, we can certainly be far ahead of the Chinese.
We talked about cartel, though there may be 20 Chinese firms, they are all acting together. They are kind of like an equivalent of an OPEC cartel.
What comes to my mind is a Chinese proverb which says that the person who makes the first bad move loses the game. Who is that going to be? India has overtaken China to become the most populated country in the world. The two now account for over 1/3 of the world's population. They are also 2 of the 5 biggest economies in the world. But they're currently in an eyeball-to-eyeball standoff along most of their 3,500-kilometer-long boundary. This conflict began 3 years ago when an intrusion by the PLA into Ladakh ended in a bloody brawl. Ironically, trade between the two nations is on an all-time high, almost $140 billion. It's quite a curious relationship, and one is compelled to wonder what Xi Jinping really wants from India.
I think he wants the Indian market, no doubt about it. We are the largest market in the world which is untapped yet. So he is certainly looking at it, particularly as he finds that the European and American markets are getting close to him.
This is a dichotomy. And these dichotomies existed for a very long time. Germany had the maximum trade with European countries in 1914. But Germany fought a long war, the Great War with the same countries. So between economy and between warfare or issues of territorial issues, these are separate baskets and they should not be compared.
It's really a matter of showing their dominance, of, in the worst case, of rubbing our nose in the mud, to just saying, hey, I'm the big guy, and I'm happy to be with you and give you to grow peacefully, as long as you show your obeisance to me in some way.
This isn't the India of 1962. This time around, India seems to have stood up to China more strongly than it did in the past. China has realized that putting India in its place is going to be trickier and more challenging than it has been before. The tactics it seems to be employing, therefore, are much more varied.
Just to give you one example which is more recent, and I looked at the data, that there are 4 areas: telecom, electronics, textiles and garments, in which China has between 1/3 and half the world's entire market for exports. That's huge. I have never seen such numbers in history. I would call that a monopoly. We talked about cartel, though there may be 20 Chinese firms, they are all acting together. They are kind of like an equivalent of an opaque cartel.
Let me take you back a few years to understand what China has been doing over the years, overtly and covertly. They have been systemically, with a lot of state sponsorship, supporting funding-wise or expansion of what they don't permit in their own countries in other countries. So that could be used for influence operations, data gathering, spying.
Well, all right, a snippet of that documentary. I again urge all the viewers to 100% check it out. Amit, before I expand this discussion further with Lieutenant General Rakesh Sharma with us on the panel, the name of the documentary, Frenemies, you don't necessarily and usually associate the word friend when China is being used in the same statement, and so is India. So any particular deliberation behind the name of the documentary, Frenemies? Why did you come to this particular word?
Exactly, and as one of the bites in the documentary even states, it's a very curious relationship. We don't like each other, it is very clear. But at the same, along the entire 3,500 long border, there are scuffles, those people are basically making roads, villages, whatever. We are trying to counter it. But at the same time, trade is on an all-time high. Chinese goods have penetrated the Indian markets very, very deeply. So that's why it's a curious thing. And if trade stops between the two countries, it's going to hurt both of us. So that is why they're friends on the economic side. We are enemies on the military or the border side. So therefore, frenemies.
Well, absolutely. Lieutenant General Rakesh Sharma, one of the reactions in the documentary also, say that one mustn't compare economy and military. These are two different aspects and baskets that a nation deals with. Trying to, draw a link between the two and then finding an approach in terms of countering another nation when it comes to your own national sovereignty, integrity or security is actually wrong. But the dichotomy of it all, frenemies, do you think the word that has been used for the documentary justifies the situation at hand, what we're facing? Throw some light on how you're looking at this, two-edged approach of both the countries. You've got a great trade between the two, but on the military side, on the territorial expansion side, we don't really see each other eye to eye.
Thank you, Kabir, for inviting me. And I saw the documentary. Amit has done a very fine job of making a good documentary. Even if I don't agree with the word frenemy, I think it's an oxymoron to say friends and enemy in the same word. The fact is that we subsist together. There are politics, there is economy, and there is strategic issues here. All three are moving into different parallel lines, and they don't tend to converge. The fact of the matter is that the politics is there. In this year alone, there would be at least 4 meetings between the two principals, the SCO, the BRICS, the RIC, and also the G20. So you can't avoid the politics behind it. You have the defense minister coming now. You had foreign minister came in recently of Chinese. So there is a political relationship which is existing, and it ought to exist. We are nations, we are neighbors, we are competitors, but we also cooperate in many ways. So those political relationships, though riding on the problems on the borders, but it exists. And I would also say the economy is a different basket, as I mentioned earlier also. The fact that we are dependent on, we have vulnerabilities in many ways in which the Chinese we are dependent on and to develop ourselves. We are a developing country and we have to be dependent on something. China is the best market to supply us lithium batteries or nuclear boilers for nuclear plants or solar panels, etc. So we can't buy it from anywhere else. So, those things, and we need these things to change over the strides of the development that we are taking across. But having said that, can we avoid the Chinese are putting us under tremendous pressure on the borders? The pressure that we've got now and the kind of eyeball, as Sandeep Onithan was saying, the kind of eyeball that we got on the borders now hasn't existed for since 1962. So, there is a strategic issues here. So there are all three separate things and all three run parallel to each other. They are not co-terminus. And this is the way we're going to live till the time. You see, I want to add here, humans create conflicts. It's humans alone who can resolve the conflicts. And, humans have to get together and find via media to do so. So we can be friends. We can drop the enemies part of it. But it requires work to be done seriously.
Absolutely. And, let's take this question a little further. Who has the vantage point over here? If this really is a tennis rally, Lieutenant General, who's more, bound to make a mistake? For whom are the stakes higher than the other?
So both have got very difficult stakes here. India has got tremendous stakes. We have very large population. You mentioned we are the highest in demography. So we have stakes to elevate the nation to from the levels of poverty that we still have. And so we have socio-economic issues here which have to be addressed. Very strong stakes we have in the matters of socio-economic development. We also aspire to have a place in the sun, because we are a nation to reckon with. We have the strength, we have the economy, we have the location, so we have aspirations also. So even our population, everybody has aspirations. So we have great stakes. So does China has great stakes. The world is suffering through a recession. There is inflation across here. The consumerism in America has taken a beating. So China, which is the largest manufacturing economy, has to be dependent on the world market. So it has to actually depend on these maritime lanes of communication that pass by close to Indian Ocean, where we are a challenger. They have a very poor geography. So, both have equivalent stakes of different types. And both have to contest each other to reach up to.
So, Lieutenant General, on that question, who has the vantage point? That's essentially a wrong question in this particular scenario, because there is no vantage point for anybody, because both have different stakes in different regions. Both the brinkmanship favors one on one sector and the other in the other. Amit, in the documentary itself, various other businesses and Chinese business has been looked at, and how even as we're forcing the ideals of Make in India and Atmanirbhar Bharat, our supermarkets are still full of quite a lot of Chinese products. So at that end, the word cartel was being used. Now we know in terms of telecom, in terms of electronics, when it comes to textiles, there's no denying that China is the main game. It is definitely the master of the seas over there. But how do we make sure that, on the business end, we create better businesses, overpower them on the trade front?
If I may, if we can use the approach China did, China looks very long term. In the 80s and 90s, as far as my research goes, we were more or less the same. We were ahead. But they looked long term. They built manufacturing for themselves. They made China a manufacturing hub, and it took time. So for India, we have started now, and the recent events have shown that we definitely have an appetite for a contest, even a long-winded one. But can we carry it on? And can we have a focused approach like China did through the 90s, through the early 2000s and the last one decade to basically make China the manufacturing hub, make it the superpower it is, make yuan the currency that is now being even traded in quite a few across the world. Not as much as the dollar, definitely not, but it'll take time. So for India, it will take time. It has definitely started. At certain places we are ahead, as the documentary states. We have made giant strides in the digital space. Our mind space, I mean, the equity that we have in Indian minds is basically enormous. You can look at all big companies, the Indians are basically ruling the roost. Can we leverage that, convert that into a big advantage to counter China? It will take time. That is what my limited understanding of the situation tells me.
Absolutely. I'm going to take this question to the Lieutenant General as well. Lieutenant General, also on the European front, the market front, about how both these economies, what kind of markets they have on the global stage. The European markets, history tells us, has favored the Chinese. But at the same time, there's a two-edged approach here as well. 40 big companies have already moved out of China. That seems to be a big concern. On the other hand, what's heartening for Indians is that India is being looked at as a very suitable place for all these big companies. I mean, we've seen various ministers. I remember K.T. Ramarao in Telangana trying to woo Tesla and Elon Musk to come and open shop over here. Lots of other big industries that are looking at India as the next manufacturing hub and site as well. On that front, could you throw some light about how India might be making better steps than China when it comes to becoming manufacturing hubs for these big companies?
So there are, it's not cut and dry. What you're asking is not cut and dry. While 40 companies may have moved out of China, the amount of FDI China is getting even now, this last year from the United States is earth shaking. While one hand they take away, the other hand they are plowing money into the Chinese market because that's still the manufacturing hub across here where most of the supply chains are starting and finishing. So Chinese are actually not winding up business because it's 40 companies may have parted ways. It still stands in the way as a great challenger to the even United States in many manners. But on the other part of the story, India has looked up. You see, in the services sector, we have done tremendous amount of job, excellent job in digital stack, in the kind of growth we have shown in the digitalization in the course of last 2 years is phenomenal. The world is watching and world is now wanting to avail of the services of India's digital stack. So there is important. But we also require manufacturing, and that as a right impetus, these productivity-linked schemes and the Atmanirbhar Bharat are actually because manufacturing provides you the jobs, that provides you employment, while services sector will provide you the fiscal advantages across there. So we require manufacturing, and any amount of manufacturing that we can entice companies to come and work in India and take advantage of our the labor, trained labor, people, skilled labor available. So that is a thing. And I think over a period of time, manufacturing is looking up. But these are, we just cannot say that the things are going not so well for Chinese because they are also in the game and they understand it. They have now gone in for consumerism within their own country in a big way. So their own philosophies are changing as to how they will earn the kind of money that they wish to earn across there. So I think there is a change happening inside China. There's change happening inside India. And if the things go the way we are going and we say $10 trillion in another decade or so, we would be a force to reckon with. And then I would like to add one issue here, Kabir, if you allow me. Right. The point is that China has got influence in the world. 151 countries are part of BRI, despite the negatives of BRI. And Chinese have got maximum trade with 127 odd countries, which matters a lot. But having said that, despite what President Xi is saying, China is not a liked country. But, it doesn't give you emotion that, you are kind of a friendly country. But whatever you might say, India comes out worldwide as a likable country by virtue of our being, by virtue of the kind of diaspora we have. So there is a attitudinal difference when you see Somebody wants to do business with China to earn money, and somebody wants to do business with Indians because he likes Indians or India as a nation and as people. They're two different things altogether.
Well,
That is
culture
a
and
challenge
values,
of
how beautifully you've made culture and values a part of this discourse as well, and rightly so. It needs to be a part. If people on the global stage end up liking India more than China, that's again a welcome step when it comes to Indians. But, you know, taking a look at this change that you're talking about, a $10 trillion economy that one hopes India becomes and becomes a force to reckon with, take a look at, you know, how sectors like the digital sector, we've really pressurized China on that front. What other sectors can India work on? I mean, when we're looking at the inevitability of change, old giving way to new, and well, of course, hoping good sense prevails, we can also, you know, push forth the right sectors in the right direction. Can we pinpoint these particular sectors that India needs to focus on vis-a-vis putting pressure on China?
So there are many things. Digitalization is, of course, one great step, and I think once ONDC comes up, we will be having an item which is not in the market in the world. Nobody has given ONDC or subject of ONDC a thought also, which we
the
are now
ONDC, the
already
OCE and lending platform also, but then again, Lieutenant General, there is also the debate around you know, this lending platform and how smooth will this transition be and how balanced will this transition be.
So we said UPI will not succeed. So we said all these tax which came in, everybody had graved out, ye nahi hoga, India may it is not possible, but all that happened. So I think initial hiccups apart, it will succeed. We need to get some things sorted out. We got to get some kind of technology done. See, we were producing all the APIs for pharma industry some time ago, 10, 12 years ago, when we shed the importance and gave it across to the Chinese, and we were totally dependent. It became a vulnerability for India. Now, in last 2 years, we understood, okay, you can't shed this important. Pharma is a strength. So what have we done? Now, out of the 38, 39 APIs that we are totally dependent on China, we've already made strides to sort out 26 of them. So, you know, we make a difference. 2 years ago, everybody said you just can't get out of the APIs and the pharma industry will come down. We made a change here in 2 years. So let's decide, can't we do change in solar panels? Now we found, suddenly you recollect, suddenly we found large deposits of lithium which have come out in Riyasi, which is close to Katra of Jammu. Lithium, we can make a difference in the batteries. In the world market, if we have such large deposits, why are we dependent on batteries on the Chinese market or solar panels? So let's decide what is most important for us to get out. And I'm not talking about Atmanirbhar Bharat, meaning everything has to be produced in India. No. Atmanirbhar Bharat ought to imply that where we have deficiencies, we do seek assistance for countries of the world, including China where need be, so that we can functionally produce the developmental efforts so that we can move ahead in the global market. Just starting from scratch and producing where the world has already made large advances will be a little difficult for us. So we have to balance the issue out as to what we want and what we must procure.
Well, I'm itching to ask you this question, Lieutenant General, you know, and put you on the spot when I ask you this, whether India and China can ever be friends. But before that, you know, let's again quickly take a look at this particular piece of documentary. It's called Frenemies. Can India and China ever be friends? Amit Ranjan, the man behind this particular journalistic piece. It's on the News9 Plus application with other incisive analysis and cutting-edge documentaries as well. We'll continue to probe the developments, ask Lieutenant General some more questions, and Amit with me here in the studio. But before that, let's quickly take a look at the snippet yet again.
This is a dichotomy between economy and between warfare. These are separate baskets and they should not be compared.
Why do we allow them to sell us goods that we can make on our own?
Specific segments, particularly on the business side, we can certainly be far ahead of the Chinese.
We talked about cartel, though there may be 20 Chinese firms, they are all acting together. They are kind of like an equivalent of an OPEC cartel.
What comes to my mind is a Chinese proverb which says that the person who makes the first bad move loses the game. Who is that going to be? India has overtaken China to become the most populated country in the world. The two now account for over a third of the world's population. They are also two of the 5 biggest economies in the world. But they're currently in an eyeball-to-eyeball standoff along most of their 3,500-kilometer-long boundary. This conflict began 3 years ago when an intrusion by the PLA into Ladakh ended in a bloody brawl. Ironically, trade between the two nations is on an all-time high, almost $140 billion. It's quite a curious relationship, and one is compelled to wonder what Xi Jinping really wants from India.
I think he wants the Indian market, no doubt about it. We are the largest market in the world which is untapped yet. So he is certainly looking at it, particularly as he finds that the European and American markets are getting closed to him.
This is a dichotomy. And you know, these dichotomies existed for a very long time. Germany had the maximum trade with European countries in 1914. But Germany fought a long war, the Great War with the same countries. So between economy and between warfare or issues of territorial issues, these are separate baskets and they should not be compared.
It's really a matter of showing their dominance, of, in the worst case, from rubbing our nose in the mud to just saying, hey, I'm the big guy and I'm happy to be with you and give you to grow peacefully, as long as you show your obeisance to me in some way.
This isn't the India of 1962. This time around, India seems to have stood up to China more strongly than it did in the past. China has realized that putting India in its place is going to be trickier and more challenging than it has been before. The tactics it seems to be employing, therefore, are much more varied.
Just to give you one example which is more recent, when I looked at the data, that there are 4 areas: telecom, electronics, textiles and garments, in which China has between 1/3 and half the world's entire market for exports. That's huge. I have never seen such numbers in history. I would call that a monopoly. We talked about cartel, though there may be 20 Chinese firms, they are all acting together. They are kind of like an equivalent of an OPEC cartel.
Let me take you back a few years to understand what China has been doing over the years, overtly and covertly. They have been systemically, with a lot of state sponsorship, supporting funding-wise or expansion of what they don't permit in their own countries in other countries. So that could be used for influence operations, data gathering, spying.
Well, you know, Amit, I was asking the Lieutenant General about pinpoint sectors that India can focus on before we digressed into the ONDC and into the lending platforms. But could you also touch a little bit upon, specifically telling the viewers what are some areas that India can now focus on in terms of putting pressure on our neighbor, our friendly neighbor, although there's a dichotomy involved here?
See, it's a difference of they're 18 trillion, we are 3.5 trillion. So if we have to compete, we have to be really smart about what are going to be the fields or the frontiers of the future. Chinese are investing heavily into AI and quantum. We have the mind basically to compete, at least the mind, if not the money.
So, or the muscle.
Or the muscle. But we have the minds and probably better minds in these fields. So we need to be smart about leveraging our advantages. Money terms, like Lieutenant General Rakesh Sharma pointed out, the FDIs are still coming. The percentage was so much. So even if it goes down a little bit, it is much, much more than India. The amount of investments they are getting. So competing with them immediately is not going to be easy, but we have to be really smart about what are going to be the frontiers of the future. AI is definitely going to be one. So I think India needs to be smart about where it invests and where it needs to compete.
Well, absolutely. Lieutenant General, would you like to resonate on what Amit here is talking about, this 18 trillion versus the 3.5 trillion margin? This margin certainly, essentially, is too huge. Even this time around, Xi Jinping, an unprecedented third term in the budget, the Chinese have not really focused so much on GDP growth because they feel they're comfortable where they are. So, a small hiccup for them won't necessarily translate into huge losses. Whereas for India, we'll have to grow about 30% to take it to the next step, and not so much for the Chinese. But if on the economic front, we know there's a big fight for Team India. On the military front, excerpts in the documentary talk about how China is not worried about the outskirts. It's going to bother when Beijing is finally going to be, on that missile radar. How do we break the invincibility image of, somebody like a nation like the Chinese along the 3,500 long border stretch? Does a bloody nose in Tibet translate into how India is taking things seriously? What needs to be done on the military front?
Okay, let me put it this way, that, if you recent history follow, a history of last 50, 100 years, weaker nations have, taken the asymmetrically large nations to task and sorted them out in wars. May it be Vietnam versus America versus Afghanistan versus America, you talk of Libya, or Syria, or Iraq, even Afghanistan, you see what has happened to Russians first and then to Americans first. It's not a question of your power that you have. It's how the asymmetrically smaller or a weaker nation fights. It's the way of fighting. The way of fighting overtakes any amount of defense budget you have. The Chinese have 3 times our defense budget, and the Americans have 3 times of Chinese defense budget. But despite that, it's how you fight. It's cognition, the word you use, the word Amit used, cognition, brain power. It's the brain of fighting which is more important than the amount that we invest in, and the kind of wherewithal and bean counting number of tanks and number of men that you've got. That makes a difference. So let it be understood that a nation might aspire to be asymmetrically large. It may not, it is not guaranteed. And wars are all messy affairs. So that be it. Second thing I wish to say is, a war is not a war like we talked about 1962. We must rub off that thought process of 1962 war from our minds, that there will be hordes of Chinese and there will be border clashes and there will be wars of this type. Well, wars have gone much beyond it. Look at now. In 1 year in Ukraine, Elon Musk supplied Starlink terminals to provide communication to entire Ukraine. And the Russians could not even, target the low orbit satellites which Elon Musk was providing for communication in Ukraine. After 1 year, the Russians have learned the art. And now they are jamming even Elon Musk's satellites. So look what they have learned. It's a question of the power of the NATO and the West, which is fighting against Russians. How they have adapted to this one, and they have now made sure that even Elon Musk's satellites are not functional in this manner. We have the brain power. We have the electronics with us, the minds, the software, the thinking process, the abstract arts. Think this way, that border should be deemed as secure. We are now occupying areas across the border, and we will give a bloody nose to anybody who comes to the border. We are hardened soldiers. But it is beyond it. The war is beyond it. It goes to space, it goes to cyber domains, it goes to missiles, it goes to, on the high seas. We need to get on to those aspects of warfare which will hurt the Chinese as much more than what happens across the borders. So a deterrence, the definition of deterrence needs to change and come out in a manner that it change. Finally, when a war happens, the Chinese should come out. If it happens, I hope it doesn't happen. I really hope there is no war, because we in the soldiery community don't like wars, because we have seen pain and anguish. But if the war happens, the Chinese should come out not laughing. They should come out anxious. So that anxiety, that bitter taste in the mouth after a war is more important. That's what we have to aim at to achieve in India.
Well, the song by Edwin Starr, War, What Is It Good For? Everybody's heard that song. We've put forth, nicely about all the factors that are at play over here. You've got a mind versus muscle angle. Both economies have different stakes in different regions. On the military front, what's happening on the business front, the history behind the two countries, the European market angle. Lieutenant General, can these two countries ever be friends, given the contemporary scenario? And of course, I mean, nobody's seen the future, but where do you stand on this point?
Why not? Why not? We must. In fact, two nations must become friends so that you develop together and you rise up and you have the China and India have the power to change the world and take on the world and to its own rules and rules of the game. But the fact is that, and countries have changed. Yeah, all these countries, France and Germany, fought like hell. Turkey and Russia fought 16 times. They have best of relationship now. Look at United States and Vietnam. All these countries, UK and US, have fought in the revolution, and they are all thick together. Why not? We can be friends, but to become friends, there has to be an understanding of the hearts and minds of the people of the adversary. Chinese have to understand that we are a nation to reckon with. We are a 5,000-year-old civilization and more. And we must be given the respect that is due to our civilization. We gave Padmasambhava and Buddha across to Tibet and to the neighbor. We have Rama being used in Indonesia and Southeast Asia. So we are a country which has got strong cultural moorings. They can't take us as and roughshod on us. It cannot be done. This is not the way to become friends. And yes, I repeat what I said. Humans create problems. British created all the problems, the British bureaucrats on the borders. But it is, need to be resolved between humans
and only humans can resolve these, and only humans can resolve these conflicts because they're the ones who created them in the first place. I would, however, believe you a little bit more if you had added the example of Russia and USA becoming friends. But Lieutenant General, that's certainly not on the list over there. But of course, I mean, like I said before, we can only hope that good sense prevails. Friendship over enemies. Well, of course, that's the idea here. But is that, and can that really be set in motion? Can that pragmatically be looked at is again another question. Many thanks, Amit, for joining us. It has been a riveting conversation.
Thank you.
We are frenemies, it seems to be at this point in time. Lieutenant General Rakesh Sharma, who commanded the Fire and Fury Corps in Ladakh, a decorated career in serving the country. Many thanks for joining us to you as well, Lieutenant General. Well, that's all the time we have for you in this episode. Please download the News9 Plus application for all the other cutting-edge documentaries. I'm sure it's going to be worth your time. That's all the time we have for you this time around. News and content continues on News9. Don't go anywhere.
This is a dichotomy between economy and between warfare. These are separate baskets and they should not be compared.
Why do we allow them to sell us goods that we can make on our own?
Specific segments, particularly on the business side, we can certainly be far ahead of the Chinese.
We talked about cartel, though there may be 20 Chinese firms, they are all acting together. They are kind of like an equivalent of an OPEC cartel.
What comes to my mind is a Chinese proverb which says that the person who makes the first bad move loses the game. Who is that going to be? India has overtaken China to become the most populated country in the world. The two now account for over a third of the world's population. They are also two of the 5 biggest economies in the world. But they're currently in an eyeball-to-eyeball standoff along most of their 3,500-kilometer-long boundary. This conflict began 3 years ago when an intrusion by the PLA into Ladakh ended in a bloody brawl. Ironically, trade between the two nations is on an all-time high, almost $140 billion. It's quite a curious relationship, and one is compelled to wonder what Xi Jinping really wants from India.
I think he wants the Indian market, no doubt about it. We are the largest market in the world which is untapped yet. So he is certainly looking at it, particularly as he finds that the European and American markets are getting closed to him.
This is a dichotomy. And you know, these dichotomies existed for a very long time. Germany had the maximum trade with European countries in 1914. But Germany fought a long war, the Great War with the same countries. So between economy and between warfare or issues of territorial issues, these are separate baskets and they should not be compared.
It's really a matter of showing their dominance of, in the worst case, of rubbing our nose in the mud, to just saying, hey, I'm the big guy and I'm happy to be with you and leave you to grow peacefully, as long as you show your obeisance to me in some way.
This isn't the India of 1962. This time around, India seems to have stood up to China more strongly than it did in the past. China has realized that putting India in its place is going to be trickier and more challenging than it has been before. The tactics it seems to be employing, therefore, are much more varied.
Just to give you one example which is more recent, and I looked at the data, that there are 4 areas: telecom, electronics, textiles and garments, in which China has between 1/3 and half the world's entire market for exports. That's huge. I have never seen such numbers in history. I would call that a monopoly. We talked about cartel, though there may be 20 Chinese firms, they are all acting together. They are kind of like an equivalent of an OPEC cartel.
Let me take you back a few years to understand what China has been doing over the years, overtly and covertly. They have been systemically, with a lot of state sponsorship, supporting funding-wise or expansion of what they don't permit in their own countries in other countries. So that could be used for influence operations, data gathering, spying,